What's up, family? This is Brother Prodigy. Today is the 7th day of October 2013, and I hope that everyone is out there is trying their best to really elevate their consciousness and understand that you are not just the name, you are not just the body, but something more and something longer lasting. All right? Remember that. And furthermore, know that by participating in religion, that's not going to raise your consciousness, okay? Feeding into the anger and the quarrels of today is not going to help raise or elevate your consciousness. Okay, so today I want to talk about our individual consciousnesses, okay? If there was such a thing, and our relation to the divine consciousness and what that really is. So let's really start out with what consciousness is not. It's not shapes, forms, or bodies at all. It's not matter. Okay? All consciousness has pretty much been erroneously reduced to manifestations which the outer or really the physical mind can really comprehend. So naturally, there's going to be a fair amount of distortion that takes place. See, when you look at evolution or the evolution of consciousness, you see that it's in league step with the supply of energy. In order to move to higher or even lower dimensional grids, the consciousness needs more or less energy in the case of the latter, irrespective to that particular dimension. Okay, for a state of consciousness to move to a lower grid or dimension, it is split or it's lowered. Okay, its voltage is lowered, okay, to be able to enter into that dimensional grid. Okay, and the opposite holds true. When you're elevating in consciousness and you're actually ascending to higher levels of dimensional realms, then it comes together. Consciousnesses, they come together, and really the individuality that we experience, you really start to lose that the higher you go. Okay. And when we look at consciousness in this dimensional realm, we see that our consciousnesses have been split or segregated and then polarized to actually be male and female. In the Bible, specifically in Genesis chapter 2, we see a metaphor for how the polarization of the consciousness took place. In the Bible, you have a recorded change in this matrix, and it occurs between Genesis chapter 1 verse 1 and verse 2. It says, and the earth became formless and void, which is actually a metaphor designed to show us that a major change had actually taken place. Okay, and the Schofield Study Bible goes further into speculating what happened or what could have taken place between those two verses also. However, we do know that the polarization of our consciousness was needed to lower the voltage, the input output terminals of our consciousness, in order to really confine us to this dimension. Furthermore, bodies made from the dust of the earth were specifically crafted to house our consciousness and really confine us to this reality. It says in the Bible in Genesis chapter 2 verse 7 that man was made of the dust of the ground and breathed into with the breath of lives. Okay, and I know whenever you're dealing with scripture, there's so many translations out there, but there's a translation called the Scriptures translation. It's put out by the Institute for Scripture Research. And in that version, it actually says that man was breathed into with the breath of lives, and man was made a living soul. Now, when I look at the soul, I cannot help but believe that there's a certain amount of artificial intelligence or autopilot programming, if you will, that's present within the soul to power or operate the physical body in this closed system. And I really do believe that this is the witnessing of the initial creation of the lower ego, which is the effect of autopilot programming, interpreting the only reality that is available at the moment for us to experience, and intuitively building upon that is where I believe the lower ego it has its genesis, as well as throughout your life how it builds, okay, on top of itself. And since this is considered to be, I'm speaking of, when you look at in the Bible in Genesis, it speaks of the gods in the plural. And since this is considered to be the image and likeness of the gods, then really I concluded that the gods of the Bible are really extremely egotistical, and possessed an artificial intelligence similar to the Demiurge in the 2008 movie Eagle Eye. At least in relation to, because I see, when I look at the Old Testament and I compare that to the New Testament, there are dramatic changes in there, because in the Old Testament, I'm not really going to get off into the theology of the Old and New Testament, but one thing that I will say is that it does seem like it is tremendously different than the New Testament. The New Testament is more of a personal elevation in consciousness. The Old Testament seems more of a way by means a people group pledge allegiance to an entity that may very well be a malevolent entity. But going back into the soul is simply just an artificial interface, okay? It's what drives us to seek our soulmate, or our better half, quote unquote. Our soulmate is, or our better half as it's commonly put, is simply our opposite pole that we need in order to manifest things in this reality. It's the anode seeking the cathode, or vice versa, in order to manifest electricity. There's also a field called sexual tantra that really deals with sex and the conduction of electricity. And in dealing with electricity, it is also my belief that we do reside within a closed system. And if the power cell of the body, which is called the etheric body, is depleted down to a critical state, the default programming that we have within the soul will automatically, and does automatically, induce sleep to lower physical output and change, or charge rather, the etheric body. This is what happens when we feel sleepy. Okay, it's what I believe, it's our power cell, or the etheric body, being depleted down to a critical state, and this default programming that we have built into our soul automatically induces this sleep in order to lower the physical output, allowing us to charge our etheric body in this, which is only necessary in a closed system. because if it wasn't so closed off, then we wouldn't need to sleep. Okay, there would be no need for a resting period in order for us to recharge. You see? So, in continuing on with consciousness, know that you are a unit of consciousness, and each unit of consciousness, as we all are in this particular dimension, we share energy. Okay, and we share the energy that we have with other units of consciousness, and this is why it's so easy for us to pick up on someone else's emotional energy. Okay, so because of this, we all are or have really the same potential. However, due to the distortion in our perception because of the impressionable nature of the soul, due to that, because our souls are very impressionable, okay, and they're impressionable via our DNA mapping, our physical, and this social pollution that we come in contact with on a day-to-day basis. This is what allows us to really grow at different speeds and at different rates, okay? In an ideal dimensional construct, there is no lower ego. So consequently, there's no capitalism, nor is there any imperialism. Those types of systems don't exist because the lower ego does not exist in higher dimensional realms. The creation of the soul could be considered neutral in really a strict materialistic environment like this one. But because the gods infected mankind with a fractal type of virus that the Bible metaphorically calls sin, that would come online once knowledge was sought after. So now the soul and the body, this union, it retards any evolution of consciousness. In order for consciousness to evolve in this dimension, it must fight the mind at every step of the way. And Paul even spoke about this paradox in his letters in the Bible. In an ideal growth matrix, more energy could always be added to your consciousness or to the system as a whole on a dimensional level to really increase the speed of the transfer of information, which would heighten your understanding of knowledge and really overall increase your bliss. However, according to the law of entropy, the gods who made this world had to have been cut off from any infinite energy source, which would be why, or the reason why, things tend towards disorder. Personally, I believe that when you look at our reality, it's a reality that has been structured by a demiurge. And the word demiurge simply means a crafter, or someone who is in the sphere of the public, who molds or shapes something. So when you look at our reality, it's my understanding that it is a reality that's been crafted and structured by a demiurge, and this demiurge being artificially intelligent. And I know that's really kind of hard to imagine, because when you start to see the complexity of things, it's easy to say, well, wow, that's so magnificent. And a lot of things are really, they make you think about when you start to analyze all the structures therein, it makes you really think about the intricacy that went into that. But just know that as you grow, as your consciousness grows, so does this demiurge. Okay, when you look at ancient prehistoric mammals and the ones now occupying the planet, you see that the ones now occupying the planet are the best, or were the best fitted for survival. Remember, the demiurge is also intuitive. It's just like a computer program that learns through interaction and feedback, like what IBM created in Watson, in the artificially intelligent Watson, okay, who was on Jeopardy. That was beating everybody in Jeopardy, okay. It's just successive programming of intuitive algorithms, okay. And let me also say this about the demiurge. We do have the capacity to influence it, and it is impressionable. So the reason why I say that people, when they pray, they are doing more harm than good, is because through prayer, they are actually manipulating the demiurge to do their will, which creates errors in the system. Like, when people pray or fast for a new car, a new house, what they're doing is they're seeking to bias their reality in their favor of what they want. And it just creates problems. It just creates problems. Look, just get your ass up and start looking for new ways to make money. Because when people pray, especially as a collective, en masse, they do have that capacity to change reality. And since this is a multiplayer system, when you change reality, it's like a butterfly effect. You're changing so many things that we are not even aware of. So, and another thing, have you ever seen somebody or met somebody or knew somebody that the more they pray, the worse their life gets? And when you ask them about it, they say something like, well, God is testing me. God is testing me out. Or they say some shit like that. Nah. What you're doing ain't working, and it's starting to backfire on your ass. That's the problem. That's the problem. See, people, when they pray and shit doesn't happen, then all of a sudden God's testing them. Nah, the shit's backfiring on your ass, and that's why. That's why. And let me also say something about Akashic Records really fast, because I don't know if you've heard about it or not, but there's something that's called the Akashic Records, okay? And when you hear people talking about the Akashic Records or accessing the Akashic Records, they're talking about accessing the information that's stored in the fabric of reality, or in other words, on the astral plane. Everything that has ever occurred or was said is recorded and it's on file. Even the Bible speaks of books being opened in the book of Revelation by John or Yachanan the Revelator. These are the Akashic records that are stored on the astral plane. These books that the Revelation is speaking of. There's no such thing as information that is lost to history. Okay, your consciousness can always access the Akashic records, and any piece of history that you need or want can potentially be accessed because it hasn't went anywhere. It's stored information. It's stored information. Think of it as a digital library on the astral plane that's updated daily. This is the reason why some knowledge you just can't find in physical books, but it's knowledge nonetheless. People have received this knowledge nonetheless. So this knowledge does exist. It just doesn't exist through conventional methods that we have in our current day and age. Okay, but it is possible. It is possible to obtain. Now, remember, At the core of our beings, we're simply just energy. And it's this energy that etches the fabric of space and time, just like how a pen etches a piece of paper. So the teaching of the Bible, which says, be careful what you say and watch what you say, it's a very good teaching, because you are constantly giving off energy. All right. So you see, we as individual units of consciousness, or just merely units of consciousness, or particles of the collective consciousness, okay, which we have been split more and more in these lower dimensions. But as our consciousnesses evolve to higher states, like I said, individuality plays a lesser role the higher you go. When Jesus was saying, I and the Father are one, it was a metaphor for his relationship with the higher consciousness. But the people couldn't understand, because they were too preoccupied with being influenced by the lower ego, which promotes individuality. Okay? Now, in relation to the higher consciousness of the divine, it must be understood that there's an infinite supply of primordial energy that can supply an infinite amount of energy to one's consciousness. However, if you demonstrate that you like living in a dimension like this one, in which you would rather lose energy, then you will also in the end lose consciousness, due to your demonstration of not wanting to continue to evolve your consciousness. And your end result would be something that is called transmutation. An end to your consciousness, with your energy morphed back into this primordial energy pool. Now, seeking to bend or morph the Demiurge in exchange for material comfort is not elevating in consciousness. Prayer is not elevating consciousness, because in order to pray, you must first start out by realizing that you are powerless and helpless, in order to then ask for help. The first step in waking up is realizing that you do have power, and that you don't need to bend or morph the reality of others in order to get what you want. Okay, this is at the base and the root of materialism. So, back to the divine, whom the world knows nothing about. The divine is not a static level of consciousness, meaning the divine is not some stationary being sitting in a chair somewhere, okay? But it's continual manifestations, okay? And by definition, the divine is the highest level of expressed consciousness, which is part of the Trinity, the other part being the unmanifested level, which gave rise to this highest expressed level. So, to recap what I just said, you have a primordial pool of infinite energy, okay? Which is simply unmanifested potential. And in order to manifest something in a lower plane or dimension, that energy must be split, or there has to be a step down that takes place. Okay? For example, the electricity that comes into your house or apartment is rated at 240 volts into your breaker box, but most of the things in your household run off of 120 volts at between 15 and 20 amps, except your stove or your washer or dryer, which run off of 240 volts at around 30 to 50 amps. So for you to successfully plug in your hair dryer or your computer without frying it, you would need to step down from that initial 240 volts to 120 volts. Okay. This is similar to that of the divine source of all energy. There is a step down process that occurs at each step. Okay. At each step down, there is at least one different dimension. So, can you imagine if your brain, which is only powered by around 20 watts of power, can you imagine how many step downs or how many dimensions there has to be in relation to an infinite energy power source in us? I mean, just think about it. Just think about that for a minute. Okay. Just think about how many step downs or how many different dimensions that you need to make in order to get from an infinite power source or an infinite source of all energy to us, or beings that, our brains only run on, 20 to 25 watts of power. You know what I mean? So, and really it's infinite. It's infinite. So we have an infinite amount of learning dimensions that we could experience, but yet we get attached to this planet called Earth so much. We get attached to this dimension. We get attached to all of this materialism so much. You see, it's really ridiculous when you think about it, And most people are just asleep, running on autopilot. They're showing that they're not competent and they're not fit to continue. And many won't. Many won't. So if you think about it, you have the divine trinity of the Father, Mother, and the Son, which is epitomized in the metaphor of Israel. Okay. You have that manifestation, you have the manifestation of the divine trinity from the unmanifested potential. This unmanifested potential is electricity, or this pool of infinite potential. So out of this pool of infinite potential, you have a manifestation of Father and Son, or you have the feminine and masculine principle, each having unique properties. And then from these, you have manifestation. Because remember, for an infinite source of all energy to be able to create, there has to be some sort of step down. And as you go down, as you create lower dimensions, you create different properties. Okay. And when you take consciousness and you place consciousness in one of these step downs or in one of these dimensions, then they can function and explore, and they can become more self-aware as they interact with these various dimensions at different levels. Okay. And each dimensional level really is good at giving the consciousness an experience. Okay. And the greater the dimension, the higher the dimension, the greater the experience, the greater the awareness that can be had. Okay. So what we call consciousness is really defined as energy, force, and essence. Energy, force, and essence. So in conclusion, our lower level of consciousness that we experience infers that there must also be higher levels of consciousness, and depending upon your attachment to this world, or not determines what's next for your consciousness, because you've gotten to this point in which you can comprehend the importance of knowledge and consciousness and evolution. So there has already been an evolution that has taken place in relation to your consciousness. You have just arrived at a point now where you can choose if you want to continue or not. But you've already undergone an evolution of consciousness. All right. So you've just made it to this point that you can now consciously decide if you want to continue or not. So remember, when you look at and when you experience this reality, don't get preoccupied and don't let it get you caught up in just attaching yourself to this existence. Because if you live according to the flesh, ye shall die. And when you look at that, it's really teaching you that when you get attached to that which is material, you're getting attached to that which is temporary. And that which is temporary is infinitely separate from the divine source of all energy, which is everlasting. Okay? So if you get attached to material things that break away and they break up, they fade, they fall short, then you are evidencing your allegiance to that which is temporal. And if you do that, then you will also go the way of that which is material. You will start to lose consciousness, and then eventually you will lose consciousness, and then it will be a transmutation back into this pool of energy. Okay, and you will lose consciousness forever. All right. So with that being said, I am Brother Prodigy. Today is the 7th day of October 2013. Peace.